I, Ajay Jha, once again, along with my ACS colleagues, Dr. Diksha Gupta, Dr. Kaushik Natarajan, and Dr. Mihesh Jha, welcome you to today's ACS Science Talk session. Just to update you on the upcoming ACS Science Talk, please visit our ACS in India webpage and register for the upcoming special ACS Science Talk in association with ACS meeting. We have also uploaded the past lecture recordings on the ACS Science Talk virtual library. Feel free to like, subscribe, and share among the scientific community. We are pleased to share that the DST ACS workshop, the 11th in the series, is going to be held on 8th of March. Feel free to register, attend, and enjoy the session. The session is going to be on the theme of chemical health and safety. We'll provide the link into the chat box later. To keep you updated with the latest research findings and the product launches at ACS, we have a monthly newsletter, ACS Insights India. Subscribe today for free. We'll provide the link in the chat box later. Again, to begin with the scientific session, it's an absolute pleasure and honor to have Professor Chennupati Jagadis with us. He's a person who is really renowned and a pioneering scientist who doesn't need any introduction, but for the people who are coming from the student community, it's good to have a short and brief introduction. So Professor Jagadis is a distinguished professor and head of Semiconductor Optoelectronics and Nanotechnology Group in the Department of Electronic Materials Engineering, Research School of Physics, the Australian National University. He obtained his doctorate from University of Delhi. Later, he worked as a postdoctoral associate at Queen's University, Kingston, Canada. After moving to Australia in 1990, he established a major research program in the field of optoelectronics and nanotechnology. He also holds honorary positions at several national and international universities. He is the convener of the Australian Nanotechnology Network and has served as the president of Australian Material Research Society from 2016 to 2019. President of IEEE Photonics Society in 2018-2019. Recently, Professor Jagadis has been appointed as the president of the prestigious Australian Academy of Science. His pioneering research work focuses on the compound semiconductor optoelectronics, nanotechnology, photovoltaics, neuroscience, and neurotechnology. He has a long list of awards and accolades, and if we start listing it out, it will take the whole session. Just to mention that he is a fellow of several national academies of science in the national and international level and has served on the editorial board of several journals, including the editorial advisory board member of ACS Anno. So before we invite Professor Jagadis to deliver his talk, a couple of instructions for the audience. Please feel free to write your questions into the Q&A tab. Avoid putting questions into the chat box, and in case of any internet interruptions, please stay with us. Now, I would like to invite Professor Jagadis to deliver his talk. I'll stop sharing the screen from my end. Over to Professor Jagadis.
Okay, thank you, Ajay, for that kind introduction. And I would like to first of all thank you and Diksha and Mihir and Kaushik and all the team at ACS India for inviting me to participate in this important event and then inviting me to give a talk. So it's been mentioned that really it's a pleasure and honor for me to do so. It has been mentioned that I'll be giving a talk on the semiconductor nanostructures for optoelectronics applications, in addition to being at the Australian National University. And I also have honored appointments in various parts of the world, and I want to sincerely thank my colleagues for inviting me to be associated with those institutions. It's been a pleasure being associated with these institutions. I also would like to start with thanking my collaborators, and it's really a collective effort between my group at the Australian National University, many groups in Australia, US, UK, China, Sweden, Italy, Russia, India, and Switzerland. So really, beauty of this is that science, there are no national boundaries for doing science, and it's been a pleasure working with many of my colleagues, and in particular, many students and postdocs, those who have been working in these groups as well. This is my group at the Australian National University, and so these are the bright young people. It's really a pleasure for me to working with them, and I want to thank them for all their hard work and then their enthusiasm and passion for pursuing the research which we do. And I also want to thank my academic colleagues, those are leading various aspects of our research, as well as also funding agencies for providing funding to our research. So here is overview of my talk, and I'll give you the motivation why we're interested in semiconductor nanostructures or nanowires in particular. And I will tell you about how do we grow these structures, and then I'll talk about various devices which we're made out of these nanowire structures or so, and I'll draw some conclusions. Before proceeding further, I would like to really acknowledge many groups, those are working in this field from various parts of the world, including India, because knowledge has been built based on others' contributions, and it's important for us to really be able to acknowledge and appreciate their contributions to the research which we are working in, and I want to sincerely thank them for their contributions and enriching our discipline. Before proceeding about semiconductor nanostructures, and let me really talk about technological revolutions. The first technological revolution started with the steam power and then led to mechanization. Second industrial revolution started with electrical power, led to mass production. Third industrial revolution started with computer power, led to automation. So now in the fourth industrial revolution, people are predicting that the biological world and in the digital world will come together, and the light-based technologies are going to play an important role, particularly for interfacing the humans and machines. And about 80% of our information is obtained by light, for example. Light-based technologies are about 1 trillion Australian dollars now, when people are predicting by 2030, these market size of these light-based industries will be doubling or so, indicating there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to really contribute to this particular discipline, which is going to play an important role in the Industrial Revolution 4.0. Also, the World Economic Forum has identified various technologies needed for the next generation industries, and they've identified holographic displays. We are working on technologies which will open up opportunities for us to be able to see holograms coming from our phones, and also wearable optical sensors continuously monitoring our health, and also light navigation and communication, and particularly LiDAR technologies, so that you're able to have autonomous vehicles, and 3D vision and gesture recognition, and enhanced machine vision and augmented reality. And again, all these require smart miniaturized optical systems. And then we have been working in this area, and in the Center of Excellence funded by the Australian Research Council on transformative meta optical systems, which has been led by my young colleague, Professor Dragomir Nishev. And we are using nanostructures to generate light, manipulate light, and then detect light using nanostructures. And really, this really opens up opportunities for us to be able to make some innovative optical systems. And this is a 7-year program, and we started this one last year. And with 5 universities are involved, over 15 international universities are also involved in this particular center. So now let me come to optoelectronics. What is optoelectronics? All of us know about electronics. And today I'm using my computer. It's all into electronics. And if any electronic device, any smart device you're using, most likely they're all have got some smart electronics there. And in the case of optoelectronics, essentially electronics is manipulation of electrons into circuits and then switching them on and off or so. In the case of optoelectronics, we are converting electricity into light. For example, in the case of light emitting diodes and lasers, for example, or conversion of the light into electricity in the case of detectors, photodetectors, and also solar cells, for example. But typically for electronics, we use silicon as a workhorse for the microelectronics or nanoelectronics industry. But unfortunately, silicon is not a very good light emitter, and because of its indirect band gap nature. So you need to have a direct band gap semiconductors. So that way we end up using group 3,5 semiconductors of the gallium arsenide, gallium phosphide, gallium nitride, gallium antimonide, combinations of these materials. And majority of these compounds are also direct band gap semiconductors. They got different band gaps. The energy difference between the bottom of the conduction band and the top of the valence band. And depending on where you want to have the emission of the light, particular wavelength of the light emission, you end up choosing the right kind of material. By mixing these ones also, you can be able to tune the emission wavelength for in the regions, whatever you want, from the ultraviolet region to infrared region, for example. In fact, just to give an example of the nitride semiconductors, gallium nitride, indium nitride, aluminum nitride-based technologies led to the development of the blue LED technology, which was a missing link for about till early 90s or so, and then which now allowed us to be able to have all 3 primary colors of red, green, blue, that allows us to be able to make white LEDs. And in fact, the work on gallium development of the blue LED has led to the Nobel Prize for these 3 Japanese scientists. And now it opened up a lot of opportunities for us to be able to make solid state lighting, for example, large area displays, and then LED-based TVs or so, for example. The same materials which are used for making LEDs could also be made use of for making lasers, which are used for laser surgery to machining to communications and a range of things which lasers nowadays are used, including digital printing and various devices, including CD players and DVD players or so. In fact, today I'm able to talk to you because of the fact that the electrical signals from my computer are translated into optical signals using lasers, and they get modulated and sent through optical fibers. And on your end, then we are converting those optical signals using photoreceivers or photodetectors. We're not able to convert into electrical signals, and that's how we're able to really communicate with each other. And it turns out the optical fiber communications don't operate in the visible region of the electromagnetic spectrum, and typically we use near-infrared region of the spectrum of 1.3, 1.55 micron wavelengths at 1300 or 1550 nanometers or so, because that's where the lowest energy, the lowest absorption and dispersion takes place in optical fibers. That's why we make use of these ones. So the materials which are used for making light emitters can also be used for light detection. And in fact, infrared detectors we make use of for biomedical imaging applications, night vision applications, and also for manufacturing, where you're able to detect where heat is generated in a computer chip where you're operating. These materials are also used to make most efficient solar cells, exceeding now 47% or so. And but these are the most expensive solar cells. And typically these are used for satellite applications because satellites are quite expensive. You want to have the most efficient solar cells there. So now people are trying to use these ones for the terrestrial applications. We're using concentrated photovoltaic systems because of the very high efficiency of these particular solar cells, for example. Nanowires. Nanowires are seen as building blocks for the next generation electronics and photonics. And one of the unique things to the nanowires is that the lattice mismatches are no longer an issue. Whenever you're trying to grow layers of materials with crystalline materials, for example, you always have to worry about what is the lattice constant, the layer which you're depositing with respect to the substrate. Lattice constant is a unit cell size which repeats itself in a crystal in 3 dimensions. So because of their nanoscale and 3-dimensional architectures, these materials can expand or contract depending on whether it's got a larger lattice constant or smaller lattice constant with respect to the substrate. So that means you can really make these things without any creation of defects. That's the most important one, without any creation of dislocations, which is normally not possible when you're dealing with the 2-dimensional materials. You can also create axial heterostructures. These green materials are different than the red materials. And so then also you can make PN junctions, for example. And that means you can be able to make lasers and LEDs and solar cells and a wide variety of things because you're able to make a single nanowire, both an P and N type and a PN junction and a diode, for example. You can also create radial heterostructures or core shell nanowires, and it opens up opportunities for us to be able to make quantum well tubes and a range of structures. We're also looking at exploring the branch nanowires for 3-dimensional architectures as well. So in fact, these are some of the examples from my own laboratory where we were shown that you can grow gallium antimonide on top of gallium arsenide despite large lattice mismatch. We're able to show you can get atomically perfect gallium antimonide on top of gallium arsenide. And particularly these materials are very good for infrared detector applications. You can also create a branch nanowires of indium arsenide on top of gallium arsenide and a nano trees of indium phosphide. And also most recently, we are moving from nanowires to nanomembranes. So you can see that they open up a lot of opportunities to be able to make all sorts of exotic structures and study their properties and then use them for various applications. Already there are many reports in the literature in terms of using photonic devices like the ones which I'm showing you here. And also that most recently, IBM Zurich has recently demonstrated indium gallium arsenide nanowire transistors on a 6-inch silicon wafer because the lattice mismatch is no longer an issue. So that means you'll be able to bring 3-5 semiconductors and silicon together. And then nanowires and nanostructures are going to play an important role both in electronics and photonics. If the nanowires are so much of importance, how do we make these structures? Well, there are 2 main techniques which we use. One is called as a metal catalyzed VLS growth process, vapor liquid solid growth mechanism. And another technique is called selective epitaxy. Typically, we use a technique called MOCVD, metal organic chemical vapor deposition. And alternatively, you can also use molecular beam epitaxy. And also people use solution processing as well. And there are some advantages and disadvantages depending on what technique you're using. We have chosen MOCVD because of the fact that it's an industrially compatible technique and it's a scalable process. If whatever you're developing in the lab, you can be able to transfer to industry. That's one of the reasons we've chosen this one. This is the work of my former student, Dr. Hannah Joyce, when she was doing her PhD at the ANU, who is now an associate professor at Cambridge University, where she has really grown these gallium arsenide nanowires, starting with the gold nanoparticles. You can buy these colloidal solutions these days from 5 nanometers up to 300 nanometers or so. And typically she uses 30 or 50 nanometer gold nanoparticles. While gold has got a high melting temperature, more than 1000 degrees Celsius, when it reacts with gallium or indium or aluminum, then what happens is that the alloy melting temperature comes down to as small as 350 degrees Celsius. So then now introduce the gas, you put this gold nanoparticle coated gallium arsenide, for example, in the MOCVD reactor, heat up somewhere between 370 to 500 degrees Celsius, and you create this gold gallium eutectic liquid, and then introduce the gases needed for the growth of gallium arsenide, for example, trimethyl gallium and arsine, and this alloy gets supersaturated, and crystals start splitting out. And the dimensions of this nanowire is determined by the dimensions of the nanoparticle which you started with, for example. So this is like dissolving sugar in water. You can keep dissolving sugar in water till its solubility limit. Once if you exceed the solubility limit, then a sugar crystal starts splitting out. Exactly the same physics is happening here, for example. So you can see that Hannah Joyce is developing something called a two-temperature growth process, and starting the growth at high temperature and then reducing growth afterwards. You could avoid all the tapering issues, and typically you end up getting conically shaped nanowires. She was able to demonstrate excellent quality, these gallium arsenide nanowires, which are cylindrically shaped, which are important for some optoelectronics applications. You can also see the transmission electron microscope image, which shows that atomically perfect nanowires, and the gold nanoparticle is sitting here. We made the nanowires as small as 10 nanometers, as big as 300 nanometers or so. Depending on the applications, you choose the diameter of the nanowires. In the case of selective epitaxy, you don't use any metal nanoparticles. We don't want to use metal nanoparticles in some cases. In that case, you deposit silicon dioxide using plasma-enhanced chemical deposition, and put some photoresist and do electron beam lithography and create patterns of holes, and you transfer those patterns of holes through plasma etching or wet chemical etching, and so that what you end up having is an example of an indium phosphide substrate with silicon dioxide with the holes there. Then we introduce this one at MOCVD reactor, heat it up somewhere between 650 to 750 degrees Celsius, introduce the gases needed for the growth of indium phosphide, trimethyl, indium, and phosphine. These gases dissociate, and then you end up creating these beautiful ordered patterns of these indium phosphide nanowires. You can see that you can see this scanning electron microscope image, which is showing these ordered patterns. In fact, the top view here, you can see that the beautiful hexagonally faceted structures and ordered patterns as well here. This is work of my former student, Dr. Qian Gao. She's now working in Blue Glass in a company in Sydney, for example. So we've taken these indium phosphide nanowires, we excited with the laser pulse to generate electron hole pairs. Essentially, they're exciting the electrons from the valence band to the conduction band, and when they fall down, they emit light. So you can see that we quantify the quantum efficiency as a function of the excitation power density. And you can see that the red curve is for the indium phosphide nanowires, and then the blue curve is for the indium phosphide epitaxial layers. And they are very much comparable, indicating despite large surface area of these indium phosphide nanowires, their surface non-rate recombination is not huge. You can get excellent performing indium phosphide nanowires. They're very good for making lasers and solar cells and other things, which I will come back to. That is not always the case in the case of every semiconductor. For example, in the case of gallium arsenide, non-rate recombination is a major issue, and you have to always passivate these gallium arsenide nanowires if you want to make use of them for optoelectronic device applications. But I'll not have time to go into the details of it. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have during the Q&A session. So we asked ourselves, if you're instead of opening a hole in this mask, what will happen if you open a slot or a ring? Again, this is work of my former student, Dr. Nain Wong, and who is now a postdoc in the group. And where again, he does the same thing, deposits some silicon dioxide, puts some photoresist. Instead of opening a hole, he ends up really patterning these slots and rings, and then try to really grow these indium phosphide nanostructures here, for example. Again, these are my colleagues, those who contributed this work as well. Again, Nain Wong spends a lot of time in optimizing various growth temperatures, flows, and all the pressures and all these things, which I will not go into the details. If any of you are interested, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on this particular aspect. So here is a case when Nain Wong opens the slot along this particular crystallographic orientation. And then you can see that he grows this, heat it up to 650 to 750 degrees Celsius, and introduce a gas needed for the growth of indium phosphide. You can beautiful these nanomembranes with these sidewall facets here. If you open the slot along another crystallographic orientation, again he grows the same thing, and in the process you end up getting another membrane, but these membranes are thicker than these ones because of the lateral growth, and you end up getting a different membrane, different facets here. If you open the slot in between these two orientations, you can get these beautiful diamond-like structures with these alternating facets, which I'm showing you here. So now you can see, instead of just using nanowires, you can be able to make thin nanomembranes, thick nanomembranes, nanodiamonds, and the sky is the limit in terms of what type of structures you can be able to make, for example. And in fact, you can see that when you open a ring, and what will happen, and if you open a ring, you can see again, you can really get these nice ring-like structures, again with these alternating facets or so. If you keep on growing, and then this ring gets filled up, and you end up creating this membrane here, the horizontal membrane. If you keep on growing further, you end up creating these nice hexagonally faceted structures, because crystals always want to move to lowest energy facets, and that's what end up happening. So, okay. So really, again, Nayan Wang spent a lot of time during his PhD in optimizing various growth conditions, which I won't go into details. And we've taken these nanostructures of nanomembranes, nanodiamonds, and nanorings, and we excited it with the electron beam and do the light emission coming out of this one, so-called cathode luminescence in electron microscope, because you'll be able to really resolve the light emission beautifully on various structures here. You can see that all these nanostructures are emitting very bright light and very uniform light, indicating that the 4 years of hard work of Nayan Wang paid off, and we're able to really produce excellent quality nanostructures, which we are planning to use them for a wide variety of applications, including making nanomembrane lasers, nanoring resonator lasers, and transistors, and a range of things. And I'll come back and then share with you how we are making use of these ring resonators for making ring resonator lasers. So in fact, you can see that we are able to show that you can create all sorts of exotic structures of nano rings, and then nano spirals, and nano stars, and then triangular shaped structures, and then you name it, and we can make these ones. And again, a lot of hard work goes of the students and postdocs in the group in order to be able to get these excellent quality structures also. So till now, I've only shown you about the materials and how we grow them and how to control these ones, various shapes and sizes or so. So now let me move towards devices. Lasers. All of us have studied about lasers. You need to have a gain medium. You need to create a laser cavity, and you need to pump the gain medium to create population inversion. And as and when the gain equals to the losses, and the lasing starts taking place. So this equation is essentially saying the same thing as this schematic, which I'm showing you here. This is standard undergraduate optics courses. We all have studied about lasers. So it turns out if you take a nanowire of the right kind of dimensions and diameter and then length or so, if you excite this light from the top here using a laser, light start propagating along the length of the nanowire because it acts like a waveguide, and both ends of the nanowire acts like mirrors because of the refractive index difference here, for example. So in principle, because also we are using 3-5 semiconductors, which naturally have got gain, that means in principle, each nanowire should act like a laser, for example, if I design things correctly, and if you get the good quality nanostructures also. And again, we have been working in this area for quite some time, and many students have worked on a wide variety of different kinds of lasers. And so, in fact, this particular work has been led by my young colleague, Dr. Sudha Mokhapati, or Associate Professor Sudha Mokhapati. Now she's at Monash University, and she closely worked with these various students or so. But unfortunately, I will not have time to go into the details of all of them, but I'm going to share with you some 1 or 2 examples here. So again, Drew Saxena has spent, who is at Imperial College now, and during his PhD, he has designed these nanowires and then looked at the light propagation and various optical modes which are propagating these nanowires, for example. Here is a case where he's looking at TM01 mode, which is propagating through gallium arsenide nanowires of about 260 nanometers in diameter. And based on his simulations, and another student, Dr. Jenny Jiang, who is at Cambridge University now, she has grown this gallium arsenide or rubidium gallium arsenide core shell nanowire, which is about 260 nanometers in diameter. And we transfer these ones onto a glass slide and look at the light emission, excite these ones and look at the light emission. And you can see that below threshold, you see a very broad light emission, like a photoluminescence or a spontaneous emission. Above threshold, you end up seeing a very narrow line width and indicating like a laser, like a stimulated emission. And you can also see beautiful interference fringes been showing that it's a coherent light source. And in fact, Drew Saxena has done simulations and measured experimentally, they match, these interference fringes match very well. And then again, you can look at the light output versus a pump intensity, like threshold-like behavior. Here it's acting like a light-emitting diode, here acting like a laser, for example. And one measure is to really look at the log-log plot showing the S-type curve, confirming that it's truly lasing. And in fact, we published this work about a decade back or so. And these are the first optically pumped gallium arsenide nanowire lasers operating at room temperature, and which really required enormous amount of designing work of the simulations and also getting the excellent quality optical property nanowires as well. So what are we doing with these lasers? So this is work jointly with my colleagues at University of Strathclyde, Professor Martin Dawson's group, in using something called nanoscale transfer printing. They developed this technique where we can come up with a PDMS stamp, pick up these nanowires, and then drop them wherever you want to be. So precise nanoscale location of these nanowires wherever you want, for example. Again, the research fellow in their group, Dr. Ben Hoggle-Habert, has really spent a lot of time in optimizing the shape of these stamps and optimizing various process parameters, for example. So again, you can see that they have really been able to transfer these nanowire lasers in front of this so-called Y-junction waveguide, which is made out of the SC8 polymer waveguide. And then by locating these nanowires and exciting them, we're able to see the light is propagating to these waveguides, and you get the light on the other end here, for example. So really, this could be very useful for optical multiplexing and demultiplexing applications for the polymer optoelectronics applications, also flexible optoelectronics applications, and really, again, we can make use of them for a range of applications. And again, the student Dimitar Joutiks has spent a lot of time in this particular work as well. So then we asked them, can you be able to locate these nanowires into nano antennas? Because they were able to locate these things precisely. This is the work of my young colleague, Professor Pang Ren, and now she's a full professor at Nanjing University, and where she was making these so-called terahertz metamaterials. And then we were able to ask them that, can you be able to locate these nanowires in the middle of this nano antenna here, for example? This nano antenna is made out of aluminum, and there was a gap here. We requested them to do that one. You can see they're able to do that on most of the times. You can see the close-up of this one. It is a nano antenna. Here's the nanowire here. If you don't have the nano antenna, when you excite this with laser pulse, the light is coming from the both ends of the nanowire, which I've shown you here, because nanowire acts like a fabric with a cavity. But when you have the nano antenna, suddenly light is coming from the vertical direction. And so that means they're vertically emitting nanowire lasers. For the first time, we're able to demonstrate that one. Essentially, this antenna is directing the radiation pattern in the vertical direction rather than lateral direction, for example. Again, narrow line width and a threshold-like behavior or so, indicating that, so again, hard work of Professor Pang Ren really paid off. And now they can be used for example, the facial recognition applications, because you can see nowadays they're using any of the smartphones, and people want to have the light to be really be able to detect your facial recognition, for example. If you want to couple the light to an optical waveguide or a fiber, you use this laser. If you want to have the light to be coming out for meta-optics applications or facial recognition applications, and you make use of these lasers also. So I mentioned to you about ring resonators, and this is work of my student, Wei Wong. And then again, he designed what should be the diameter of the ring, what should be the width of the ring, what should be the thickness of the ring. And he has grown these ring structures, and along with Nine Wong. And then he excited these ones, and a broad light emission below threshold and a sharp light emission above threshold. You can see that a very broad light emission image you can see. Above threshold, you can see a beautiful spring gallery modes. And again, he compares the experimentally measured ones with the theoretical ones. They compare very well. And again, late last year, we published this work or so. Again, more than 2 years of hard work of Wei Wong has really paid off. And you can see again, threshold-like behavior and S-type curve as well. Again, these ring resonator lasers are very good for photonic integrated circuit applications, where you can be able to couple the light to various photonic circuits as well. Till now, I've only shown you electrically pumped lasers, optically pumped lasers. Ultimately, industry wants to have electrically pumped lasers. And so that means you need to have the PN junction. I mentioned to you PN junctions are important. And we dope this indium phosphide initially with P-type dopant like zinc, and grow indium gallium arsenide quantum well, that yellow layer there. And then you grow on top of that one N-type indium phosphide with the silicon dopant. And then there's the work of Dr. In-Suk Yang, and then he is now, during his PhD, he worked on this one. He's now at Samsung in Korea now. He transferred these ones. He spent about 2 years in optimizing these structures and transfer these ones, and then make contacts using electron beam lithography with the gold titanium or so, and then injects current and look at the voltage drop. And you can see IV characteristics showing beautiful diode-like behavior, indicating that hard work of Nine Wong has paid, the In-Suk Yang has paid off. Now, if you're injecting the current, and you can see the light emission intensity as a function of wavelength here, and as a function of current as well. And you can see the higher the amount of current you're injecting, higher the amount of light coming out of this one. But if you plot the output intensity versus current, you don't see any threshold-like behavior, which I've shown you earlier for lasers, for example. So essentially what it's telling you is that they're behaving like a nanowire LEDs, not like lasers. There's no narrowing of the line width as well. So why is that? This work led by my colleague, Professor Lan Fu. And so the reason is that when you need to inject current, you need to put metals. Metals create also a lot of optical losses. You create a lossy cavity. If you create a lossy cavity, get over those losses, you have to pump them harder. You generate heat. And in the process, what happens is that the heat reduces the gain. You have to pump it harder. It becomes like a vicious circle. So now another student, Nikita Agrani, who came from IIT Kharagpur, she has been working on this project for the last 4 years. It's been a really challenging project. And by replacing these metals with indium tin oxide and aluminum zinc oxide and other transparent conducting oxides to minimize the amount of losses we are creating, but still be able to inject current and reduce the contact resistance. That's been the major challenge. Yunusuk, before leaving, and he also created, instead of making single nanowire LEDs and also nanowire array LEDs. And again, to be able to make contacts on the top, you need to fill this with the polymer material, make some contacts at the top and the bottom or so. And one of them, you can see that as an injected current, you can see the bright light coming out of these ones. One of the nice things with this one is that you can be able to peel these things off. That means you can be able to create a foldable LEDs, because Samsung and Apple and others want to create foldable phones and foldable computers and other things. So that's why Yunusuk can spend a lot of time in really developing this particular foldable LEDs or flexible LEDs, which we've really been able to do that one using these the polymer embedded nanowire LEDs also. And of course, we have been working in addition to lasers and LEDs and a wide variety of other devices. For example, terahertz radiation. Terahertz radiation really falls between electronics and photonics. And then why we're interested in terahertz radiation? And only the last 20 years or so, we've been developing terahertz sources and detectors or so. 1 terahertz is about 300 microns in wavelength. Just to give you an idea, a blue light is about 400 nanometers. And then we are talking about close to 1,000 times that of the standard wavelengths of visible light, which we're talking about. The reason is that people are interested because many chemical molecules, biomolecules, and including explosives and others have got signatures in the electromagnetic spectrum in the terahertz region. And that means you'll be able to detect explosives, for example, for security applications and other things, and also trying to look at the biomolecules and other things as well. Also, terahertz radiation is reflected by metals, for example, or pass through. Also, then you can be able to see where the metals are, for example. And so that means it's a non-ionizing radiation. In fact, it's unlike in the old days, we used to use X-rays. Nowadays, in the airports, we don't use X-rays because X-rays are ionizing radiation. And we're using terahertz radiation. When you go through this big box, which you go through, that's what's happening because you can detect metal. Also, they're useful for biomedical imaging applications of cancer detection and detection cavities in the teeth, wireless communications, a detection of water content in the leaves so that you're not wasting precious resources like water, and you only water the crops when they need to be, for example. And this is work jointly with my colleagues at Oxford University, and we are developing terahertz detectors. And this is work of my former student, Dr. Kun Pang, during her PhD at ANU. She transferred these nanowires onto quartz substrate and makes contacts using electron beam lithography and connects to an ammeter, for example. Then we take these nanowires, they were detectors, to Oxford University. She's gone there and measured these ones, excite these nanowires with a laser pulse to generate electron hole pairs, then come with the terahertz pulse, electric field of the terahertz pulse separates these carriers. You can measure the photocurrent as a function of time. If you measure the photocurrent as a function of time, you can measure the electric field of the terahertz pulse and also conductivity of the material. Again, to cut the long story short, and Kun Pang, during her PhD, she's demonstrated the gallium arsenide single nanowire terahertz detectors, and then later on indium phosphide single nanowire terahertz detectors. And you can see the broad bandwidth up to 2 terahertz or so. And then you see simulations and experimentally measured ones match very well. And we use something called a bow tie antenna to couple the light efficiently. Here is this is made out of the gold here, and you can see the nanowire sitting here, for example. She also compares this with the bulk reference ones, and they are very much as good as these ones, but also much smaller with respect to the bulk detectors, for example. So now she, during her postdoc at Oxford, she has been using, instead of using one set of nanowires, and she's trying to make another detector on the 90 degrees to the first one. The challenge has been to avoid the contact between the top nanowires and the bottom nanowires. And again, after 3 years of hard work, she was working with my colleagues at ANU and Strathclyde. She was able to fabricate these devices without making any contact from the top on the nano one, because scanning electron microscope image here. So what are we using these things? That particularly we want to measure polarization result terahertz detectors. If we take a terahertz metamaterial, you send a terahertz pulse through this one, and it's a terahertz pulse is interacting with the metamaterial. It changes the polarization properties. So that means we use this polarization, our detector, to be able to measure both X and Y polarization so that we can understand the measure about this terahertz metamaterial or biomolecules or anything which you're dealing with, for example. So again, to cut the long story short, and so really she's fabricated these devices and designed them and fabricated them. And here is the transmission through this terahertz metamaterial for the horizontal polarization and then vertical polarization, theoretical simulations, the experimental measured ones, showing very much comparable data, indicating that her hard work has really paid off. And now we demonstrated these polarization sensitive, amplitude sensitive, and phase sensitive terahertz detectors. And in the middle of the pandemic, and she was able to publish this work in Science, and she was really thrilled with this one because she put a lot of hard work in this one. Again, we're using these nanowires, also can act like resonators. Based on this work of my colleague, Dr. Jian Li, and she has been looking at what will happen if we change the diameter of the nanowires. If we change the diameter of the nanowires, essentially change the resonant wavelength, the way the light has been absorbed, for example. Based on this design, she has really grown these nanowires of different diameters in different parts of the nanowire, and be able to really detect these wavelength selective detectors, for example. And using our detectors in collaboration with my colleagues at University of Western Australia, we were able to really take this image and then be able to do the imaging using this one, indicating that we can be able to create a multi-wavelength detectors. And again, this work has only be published only late last year or so. Again, the 2 years of hard work of Jian Li and others also paid off. Again, we work on nanowire solar cells, and again, nanowires have got an important role to play in terms of solar cells because of their, the light collection or the light funneling properties, and also low reflection properties. And again, because of time limitations, and we do lots of simulations, what should be the diameter of the nanowire, what should be the height of the nanowire, what should be the diameter to pitch ratio. And so you can see that the nanowires of about 2 to 3 microns is more than sufficient if you're using gallium arsenide or indium phosphide. Again, diameters typically simulations show that it needs to be somewhere between 150 to 160. Diameter to pitch ratio, pitch is the distance between the nanowires, should be around 0.5 or 0.6. Based on these ones and this work of Dr. Vidaraj, and so really he's at Glasgow University now. He's grown these nanowires of indium phosphide and then coated with the N-type zinc oxide and with aluminum doped zinc oxide, also 4 shell nanowires, for example, here. And then we measured these devices and then able to show that you can get efficiencies as high as 17% or so. And then my colleagues tell me these are the best reported radial junction nanowire solar cells or so. And most interestingly, we are also embedding the polymer material between the nanowires. That means they can be also peel these things off. So it means they can be used for flexible solar cells. For example, if you're using it, you can put it on your backpack, be able to charge your electronic devices while you're traveling and other things as well, for example. We've been using these nanostructures also for photoelectrochemical water splitting to generate hydrogen. And again, we make use of this work has been led by my colleagues listed here. And we take photoanodes and then typically a semiconductor. You excite this one with the solar light and you generate electron hole pairs. Holes come and oxidize water. Electrons go there and then react with protons here and then generate hydrogen here and oxygen here, for example. Okay? It's a simple photoelectrochemical process. The challenge is that these photoanodes, either they are stable but inefficient or otherwise efficient in unstable. So that's been the challenge of being able to find stable and also efficient these anodes and cathodes, for example. This is the work of my young colleagues, Dr. Reddy and Dr. Liu. And so then again, they've been looking at gallium nitride, and these are the top-down fabricated gallium nitride nanowires. And not normally gallium nitride is very difficult to etch, but then it turned out that even these photo-oxidation conditions, and then corrosion is a major problem, and we had to coat this gallium nitride with cobalt oxide to be able to stabilize these ones in order to be able to get a good performance from these structures. Okay? Again, they've been exploring a wide variety of semiconductors, indium phosphide and other semiconductors. Again, I will not have time to go into the details. Let me finish off with the last topic of brain repair. This is the work of my young colleague, Dr. Vinny Gautam. She, in fact, did her PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru Center in Bangalore. And now she spent some time in my group, and now she's a lecturer in biomedical engineering at Melbourne University in Melbourne. So when she was joined our group, and we've been exploring and asking ourselves, now what can we do? Because she came from organic semiconductors and the neuroscience background. And as you know that all of us have got about 80 billion neurons, and then they really these neurons form into these neuronal networks. So if there's a brain damage because of accident or something, you break this neuronal network, and then you lose some of the functions, for example. We asked ourselves, can we create a nanoscale scaffold here, be able to guide the neuronal circuit formation so that we'll be able to give the functions back to people, those who got brain damage, for example. This is really an interdisciplinary and exciting project. Vinny has spent more than 2 years in optimizing various protocols in order to be able to grow these structures. Here is a case of this neuronal cell. This is a cell body soma here, grown on indium phosphide nanowires. You can see that these axons or neurites are really following these patterns beautifully here. Even these dendrites are following this nanotopography of these nanowire patterns here beautifully. Instead of using a single neuronal cell, and if you use a multiple neuronal cell, what will happen? In the square box is the one where you got this indium phosphide nanowires. You can see these green ones are these neuronal cells, and these are the axons or the neurites are really following these patterns beautifully in the square pattern also here, for example. If the neurons which are grown on indium phosphide plane substrate, plane surface, you can see these neurons or neurites are really following these random connections, and there's no really following any pattern like this here, for example. What Vinny Gautam does is that she does something called calcium imaging. She puts a calcium dye as and when the neurons are really firing action potentials. So then what happens is the calcium ions are passing through these ion channels, and then the concentrations of the ion channels will determine the fluorescent intensity of this particular dye, for example. Then she takes a video of this one, and she looks at if this neuron is firing, what's happening to this neuron and this neuron and this neuron and these astrocytes, and tries to create correlation maps. That means indicating are these neurons start communicating with each other or not. She compares these neurons which are grown on nanowires with the nanowires which are grown on plain glass substrates typically neuroscientists use. So here's a case when she's grown these neurons on glass substrates, and she looks at this video imaging of this calcium imaging of these structures, change in fluorescent intensity as a function of time. You can see that these neurons are really randomly firing. You see very little correlation coefficient if they're grown on glass substrates. But whereas these neurons which are grown on indium phosphide substrates, they're all firing at the same time. You see excellent correlation coefficient, indicating that there is some sort of a synchronized and correlated activities taking place in this neuronal network which we have grown on indium phosphide nanowires, for example. When Vinny presented his work about 4 years back or so, and so then at a neuroscience conference in Melbourne, they were always asking her what neurons you're using. She was saying that she's using mice neurons. Then they said, how about using human stem cells? So now we got a project funded by the Dementia Australia Research Foundation and Libribar Foundation. And then we are taking the stem cells from the Alzheimer's patients and then healthy people, and then really growing these so-called mini brains using CRISPR-Cas9 technology, and then with and without microglia, and then measuring the multi-electrode analysis and calcium imaging to understand the signaling differences behavior between Alzheimer's patient organoids or mini brains and then the healthy people, so that we better understand dementia and how can we be able to help people. We're also working with computer scientists and applying artificial intelligence techniques or deep neural networks in order to be able to really look at the differences in the data and the signaling behavior data. Also, we're fabricating these nanowire the electrodes, and these were fabricated by Dr. Vidar Raj during his postdoc in our group after finishing his PhD. And we want to be able to measure the single neuronal cells as well as the networks so that we better understand. We are working with stem cell biologists, neurobiologists, computer scientists, and nanotechnologists and physicists. So really an exciting multidisciplinary project. And I'm learning a lot because my knowledge of neuroscience is very limited, and it's always fun to learn something new. In conclusion, nanowires open up opportunities for manipulation of light matter interaction at the nanoscale and developing new class of lasers and LEDs, infrared and terahertz detectors, integration of optoelectronic devices on various platforms, and solar cells and PEC water splitting, engineering the growth of neuronal networks or so. Really, it's really exciting development, and we're really having great fun exploring these wide variety of nanostructures for a range of applications. Let me finish off with some information, and as it's been mentioned already, that I serve on the editorial advisory board at the ACS Nano, and in ACS Nano or Nanoletters are the two journals which we recently published quite a lot. And I also serve as editor-in-chief of Applied Physics Reviews. And our Center of Excellence, which I mentioned, once in a while we advertise positions in this 5 different universities. Please keep an eye on this website. And also considering that I started my life in a small village in India and studied in front of a kerosene lamp and lived with my maths teacher in a neighboring village to be able to finish my high school, as a gratitude to our parents and our teachers and all, my wife Vidya and I have started an endowment to support students and young faces from the developing countries to come and spend some time at the ANU. And also our university also looking at this endowment started their own program called Future Research Challenge Program. And we had the 52 students came from India and Indonesia. And unfortunately in 2019, or unfortunately last 2 years due to COVID, we're not able to host anybody. And we're hoping in 2023, we'll be able to host some people again, mainly opening the doors for the next generation. With that, I want to thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yeah. So thank you, Professor Jagadis, for this wonderful talk. And really, we can see the comments in the chat box, and the audience have liked it very much. So before going into the Q&A session, we'll have a quick poll for the audience to capture their response, and I'll launch the poll for them. So here's the poll, and I'll request the audience to share their response here. And here we go. So the first question is, after attending the ACS Science Talks, how likely you to recommend ACS Science Talk to a colleague, publish in an ACS journal, join renew membership with ACS? Then are you attending ACS Science Talk for the first time? Yes or no? And then how did you hear about ACS Science Talks that you are attending, whether it be any mode of communication, Google search, the landing page of ACS, or emailers, WhatsApp from your friends, whichever way you have come to know about this program. So I'll wait for a few seconds, and I can see the responses coming in. So I'll start the countdown. It's 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and here we go as 1, and close the poll for all the attendees. Thank you so much for your response. I'll end this poll and quickly share the result for all of us. And as we can see here, 65% of the people have responded to that they would recommend ACS Science Talk to a colleague. 29% would like to publish in ACS journals. 6% would like to join or renew ACS membership. It's good to see that they are at 35% of people are attending the ACS Science Talk for the first time. And again, emailers from ACS are the best mode of communication. So thank you so much.